Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Now that Senator McCray is here, we can get started. All right. Department of Service and Civic Innovation. Mr. Cash.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Like you just said, I'll be giving the budget analysis for the Department of Service and Civic Innovation, or DSCI. DSCI is a newer agency combining existing volunteer programs with new service year option pathways established by the SERV Act and related legislation. If you join me on the cover page, you can see the fiscal 2026 allowance is $56.6 million. However, I will point out that most of the special funds reflected are double counted with general funds that are directly seeding those appropriations. So Exhibit 1 on page 2 shows what the DSCI budget looks like without that double count. And this reflects the actual amount of total funds available for expenditure. The fiscal 2026 allowance increases by $4.3 million in total funds, removing this double count compared to fiscal 2025, or by 12% to $41 million. Exhibit 2 on page 3 shows an overview of agency spending. The light blue slice for Maryland Core Special Funds is mostly supported by the 2 green slices representing Maryland Service Year Option and Young Adult Service Year Option pathway funds. The Governor's Office on Service and Volunteerism also administers over $6 million in federal grants for volunteer work, and the remaining $15 million is for administration of the various service programs under DSCI. Exhibit 3 on page 5 shows the proposed budget change of $3.4 million. I'll point out $1 million in IT funding for a new customer relationship management system and $500,000 for a new grant management system. DLS recommends reducing the $1 million for the customer relationship management system while retaining the funds for the grant management system. This is due to the new age of the agency as well as the fiscal condition of the state. At the bottom of page 6 is a discussion of the BRFA cuts. Current law requires $15 million to be appropriated to the MSY fund each year, but the BRFA would reduce this to $13 million in fiscal 2026 only, so it would retain the future mandates of $20 million that will kick in 2027. In addition, current law requires DSCI to implement a target for the YA pathway participation, and while this does not represent a mandated appropriation, a BRFA provision was included to reduce those participation requirements, delaying the year at which the program will be fully expanded. And it reduces general funds by $4.8 million, shifting more of the agency expenses to fund balance. Exhibit 4 on page 7 shows the funding for these 2 pathway programs, minus the double counts, so you can see the total funds available to spend each year in each program. The current budget plan assumes consistent growth in grant funding and a large growth in administrative expenses, which is related to new positions and new IT projects. The personnel data section begins on page 8. DSCI is adding 38 regular positions in fiscal 2026, which includes 12 service success coaches that are converted from contractual positions, 22 new service success coaches, and 4 new administrators. These changes add a total of $2.3 million in annual costs, including the net decrease for contractuals. At the same time, there has been an increase in vacancies. These vacancies are across the department, but I'd point out that 4 vacant administrator positions are currently under recruitment by Maryland Core, and that is in addition to the 4 added administrator positions. Underpinning these projections is the goal ratio of 1 coach to 25 participants. The current ratio based on beginning enrollment is 1 to 50. And by applying that existing ratio to the projected enrollment of 850 total participants, DLS estimates that only 17 total or 5 new coaches are necessary to maintain existing staffing ratios. Therefore, due to those vacancies and the ratio of existing staff to participants, DLS recommends reducing the new positions and associated funding, leaving 5 new coaches. This action requires DSEI to use existing vacancies for administrative needs rather than increasing the position allotment. Key observation 1 begins on page 10. Exhibit 5 compares the two pathways to each other. Mandated appropriations only apply to MSY, while the participation target only applies to the YA pathway. The application process is joint, and DSEI sorts applicants into each program based on their eligibility. DSEI has proposed legislation changing some of these requirements, including the requirement that completion awards be offered as Maryland 529 plans, as well as the requirement to report on the use of those plans at post-secondary educational institutions. The departmental bill would also allow both pathway funds to be used for either pathway expenses rather than just for expansion of the programs, and eliminates the requirement that participants be graduates of Maryland schools. Exhibit 6 on page 11 shows the number of Maryland Corps participants placed in government partner agencies. DSEI reports that 107 partner organizations hosted Maryland Corps participants in the first cohort, including 14 state and local government agencies. Exhibit 7 on page 12 shows which government agencies have employed graduates of Maryland Corps following program completion. Additionally, at the bottom of page 12 begins a discussion on the subsidization of wages by partner organizations. Stipends are currently $15 an hour, with DSEI paying $10 and partner organizations paying $5. Committee narrative in the 2024 Joint Chairman's Report required DSEI to create a plan to have employers pay a greater share of that stipend. DSEI did not decide on one strategy, but they discussed 3 different wage subsidization strategies that have varied projected impacts on the composition of partner organizations. DLS is asking DSEI to comment on a timeline for developing specific plans and beginning to reduce the level of wage subsidization that's currently provided to partner organizations. On Exhibit 8 in page 13, you can see that $8.3 million was paid to participants in stipend costs for that first cohort of 275 individuals. $1.4 million was provided in completion awards to 230 graduates. Finally, on page 14, there is information regarding the sunsetting of Volunteer Maryland. DSEI reports that the program was ended because its impact had declined and resources could be used more efficiently elsewhere. Recommended actions are on page 15. Action 1 reduces funds for the customer relationship system, while item 2 reduces funds for new positions. With that, my presentation is concluded, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Questions from the committee? Senator McCray. Oh, okay, very good. Okay, thank you very much. Secretary.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and honorable members of the Budget and Tax Committee. For the record, my name is Paul Montero. I have the blessing of serving as the Secretary for the Department of Service and Civic Innovation. I'm joined by my colleagues, our interim CFO, Lisa Bishop, and our Deputy Secretary, Sarah Flamang. With your permission, I hope they can briefly just touch on a few pieces of testimony and assist with any questions. We've been able to provide written testimony in addition to the terrific work that Mr. Cash has done, and I just want to thank him for his in-depth analysis and report on our operations and our budget. So thank you, Mr. Cash. We also want to thank the administration for our budget proposal, which takes into account the growth of this first-in-the-nation program. The governor's proposed budget allocations will allow us to fulfill a priority of leaving no one behind. 18 months ago, we were tasked with making the vision of the Serving Every Region Through Vocational Exploration Act a reality. It's an ambitious undertaking that combines elements of service, workforce development, financial literacy, and leveraging a shared experience so that people from every part of the state are able to see one another and respect one another even if they see the world differently. The SERVE Act created 2 pathways, as Mr. Cash mentioned, the Young Adult Service Year Option pathway for those who have completed high school in the last 3 years, and the Maryland Corps program for people of any age. We launched the inaugural class in October of 2023, and 230 members completed their terms last August. This class gained valuable workforce skills, with over 170 of them leaving us with a U.S. Department of Labor recognized credential, and over 2,500 certified competencies, and completing 42,000 hours of technical training. Members served with more than 100 employers around the state. Folks like Justin Paleska joined us after working a series of retail jobs, not sure where he fit or where he belonged. Being placed at the nonprofit Loved Wins, he reports that he gained confidence, opportunity, and experience. Mo Reyes joined us after working as a cashier at a gas station while pursuing his undergraduate degree. He was placed with the Department of Veterans and Military Families, and was hired by the Department of Veterans and Military Families to a full-time position as the Constituent Services Coordinator. I saw Secretary Woods over the weekend, and he explained to me how Mo has created their Constituent Services program, reaching over 780 veterans and military families with support around their benefits and financial supports in the last year. And now they have a second service year option member serving there currently. Class 2 kicked off on September 11th with nearly 600 members hailing from every one of Maryland's 23 counties and Baltimore City. Now serving at nearly 200 employers spanning nonprofits, businesses, and more than 20 state and local government agencies. We included a number of examples in the written testimony where members are making a difference. In the interest of time, we just highlight a couple. Our folks serving at a wider circle in Montgomery County are connecting families to basic home needs, including furniture, clothes for jobs and interviews. Those serving at the Asian American Center of Frederick, working in child development centers and helping with outreach fairs about health resources. Serving at downtown Snow Hill, incorporating youth activity programming, and serving at Boys and Girls Clubs statewide. I'd now like to turn it over to Lisa Bishop, who's rendered invaluable support as our interim CFO, to zero in on 4 key areas identified in the DLS analysis, starting with the CRM system.
Thank you, Secretary. And for the record, I'm Lisa Bishop, Interim Chief Financial Officer. The Department of Legislative Services, as you heard earlier, proposed a little over $1 million reduction in our general funds due to the financial condition of the state and early stages of the Maryland Corps program implementation. This would delay the procurement for a customer relationship management system, or CRM. And while we certainly understand all of those challenges that precipitated that recommendation, we do want to note that the CRM is not to enhance technologies, but to actually implement a technology system that would bring program and grant management in line with the amount of members and host sites we will have going forward. Right now, we manage most of this using interdependent spreadsheets. We anticipate the ongoing costs for the CRM would be significantly lower, and that would reduce inefficiencies, and improve communication, and ensure compliance more broadly for the department as we increase the number of organizations and members. The next key area identified in the DLS analysis is personnel data, which relates specifically to contractual conversions and 4 administrator PINs. DLS recommends the removal of several Admin Officer 3 positions, also known to us as Service Success Coaches. This would reduce the budget by about $1.3 million. Those admin officer or success coaches are really critical to the success of the members serving in the Maryland Corps program. The governor's proposed budget includes a ratio of 25 members to 1 coach, or 34 coaches total. By recommending a doubling of the ratio to 50 to 1, it would unduly burden those coaches and diminish the experience members have when they are in the program. Right now, our coaches provide critical supports to remove barriers for our members to serve. They also help them figure out their transition to college or enter the workforce, including academic preparation, career exploration, and self-advocacy. As a result, the agency respectfully proposes that we increase the ratio of members to 35 to 1 for a total of 24 service success coaches. We believe this compromise would decrease the number of coaches needed, while hopefully not substantially altering the experience for members and their ability to successfully complete the program. And then finally, DLS also proposed a reduction of a little over $300,000 for 4 additional PENs. These would also support both the members and our grants management work. However, we partially concur with this recommendation and are considering other ways to fulfill these member support and compliance duties, while acknowledging it may result in less intense support for members and less oversight of program implementation and state funds. It's worth noting that if the funding for the CRM were restored, the impact of not having these positions will be significantly lessened because we will no longer have to rely almost exclusively on highly manual transactions to manage the program. The third key area identified in the analysis is wage subsidization and cost sharing of the host site partners. For this, I'll turn it over to our Deputy Secretary, Sarah Fleming.
Thank you, Lisa. Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Sarah Fleming, Deputy Secretary for DSCI. The Department of Legislative Services recommended that the department discusses and develops specific plans and begins to reduce the level of wage subsidization to maximize use of funding for the program going forward. The department submitted a joint chairman's report in December 2024 on the department's goal of moving towards increasing the cost sharing of host site partners. Building on significant progress, including doubling required contributions from large host site partners from Class 1 to Class 2, the department's phase strategy emphasizes equity, accessibility, and financial sustainability. Diversifying our host site partner pool, implementing scalable cost-sharing models, and leveraging public-private partnerships, the department is laying the groundwork to support 2,000 members by 2026 to 2027, while maintaining its commitment to maximizing public resources. For Class 3, which will be during fiscal year 2026, DSCI has implemented a tiered cost-sharing model for all partners that would result in 33% of all wages subsidized in Class 3. You can see the details of this in our written testimony. These tiers were established to allow organizations of all sizes to continue to participate, but also to promote the wage subsidization needed to continue to grow the program. While the smallest organizations will be responsible for 20% of the wages for members, the largest host site partners will be responsible for nearly all of their members' wages. To achieve 50% wage cost sharing in fiscal year 2027, DSCI plans to increase requirements accordingly. The last key area identified by the DLS analysis is the Governor's Office of Service and Volunteerism, also referred to as GOSV. The Department of Legislative Services recommended that the department provide additional information on why funding increased by 42.5% in fiscal 2024 and how GOSV will maintain elevated levels of volunteers despite less grant funding. The Governor's Office on Service and Volunteerism funding increased by 42.5% in fiscal year 2024, largely due to federal American Rescue Plan funds. We were able to invest in supporting the preparation and planning of AmeriCorps programming in Maryland through strategic investments meant to allow for thoughtful and well-planned programming to set up programs to maintain their impact long-term and sustain the level of volunteerism across the state. In conclusion, we understand and appreciate the challenges that lie ahead with the state's budget. The department remains grateful for the ongoing support to ensure that we can continue to expand opportunities for Marylanders to address critical community needs. I want to end by sharing that less than 2 years after the passage of the SERV Act creating the Department of Service and Civic Innovation, the application of Class 3 launches today, just went live this afternoon. It's available at serve.maryland.gov, and we would welcome your support in helping to spread the word about the opportunity. We are happy to answer any questions the committee may have.
Questions from the committee? I have one. Is the CRM, is that the funding for that for a custom system for your department, or is it off the shelf?
It would be working with Salesforce to build out the specific needs that we have, but really the basic CRM system kind of using their off-the-shelf capabilities.
It seems pretty high for off the shelf. Is that, have you had conversations with them about that? I mean, I use Salesforce myself, so.
Yes, this is based on the quote from Salesforce from the contract, the state contract through Carasoft.
Okay, thank you. Senator McCray?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Secretary, to your team, just thank you all for your leadership in reference to, I see these young scholars in my community, I see them all across the General Assembly, and like that's what it's about, just making sure that they're wrapped we're wrapping our arms around them and also giving them the support that they need to thrive and be successful adults. I did look at exhibit number 6. It gave a list of the respective governmental agencies that you all are dealing with, and it made me think, like, are you all reaching out, or have you reached out to the quasi-agencies, the Maryland Stadium Authority, TEDCO, MEDCO? I think these folks also have opportunities to be able to present our young scholars in these specific fields.
Well, thank you very much for the acknowledging what you're seeing in your community and supporting our members doing the Maryland Core and Service Year Option Program. And yes, we have reached out to some of the quasi, not the Stadium Authority, but TEDCO, MEDCO, because we do see them as unique opportunities to give our members a unique educational experience and find out, especially for those interested in being entrepreneurs. So we've reached out to some of the quasis, not all of them, but we're working through that. Our hope is to have a footprint at every state agency and quasi once we get to 2027.
My apologies for being late. Now, for my Coke as well.
Oh, no.
Thank you very much. So, question, your federal money, how's it going? What do you know about what's going on in Washington?
Vis-a-vis your federal money.
Thank you for the question, Senator. We're obviously tracking that closely. The freeze that occurred 2 weeks ago stopped me in my tracks because we have thousands of AmeriCorps members serving around the state. And as you all recall, AmeriCorps was put under the umbrella of DSCI when you created the agency. And so nearly 3,000 touched by the Senior Corps programs and 1,100 serving in AmeriCorps now. So what, we've seen the federal agency follow the lead of the new team in D.C. in terms of freezing anything touching DEI or anything resembling it, refugee resettlement work. So that is an important thing that I did want to highlight, because our overall portfolio and what service looks like in the state could be significantly and adversely affected as the AmeriCorps funding is challenged.
Let me follow up on that briefly. On the AmeriCorps funding, have they told you something specific on the AmeriCorps funding?
No, they have not. They have not told us. We've seen communications from the interim or the acting head of the agency, but that's really passing along information related to their posture on diversity type programming, but nothing specific on the flow of grants.
Okay, thank you.
And we've accelerated our drawdowns of everything.
I can imagine.
And the frequency of any federal
No,
law.
I understand. Okay. If you could let us know if you hear something more specific, like, oh, you're doing a great job, keep doing it, we're not going to mess around with you, or stop spending money tomorrow, or stop spending money by March 30th. When you get something specific, we're asking that of lots of agencies, and so if you could provide us with an update when there's something to say, that'd be great.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Good to see you, Mr. Secretary, and
Hello,
the
Senator
rest of
Edelman.
you. Appreciate you being here. I know that you get funding from other sources as well, and the statute, as I recall, allows you to do that from private sources, from other foundations, et cetera. Can you shed a little light on what that outside funding looks like?
Thank you for the question, Senator, and the support, Senator Hedelman. And we have been aggressive in chasing, since the inception of the agency, outside resources, other people's money. And pleased to say that the California Volunteers Fund gave us over $1 million to launch the Climate Corps, a significant grant from Strata, a significant grant from the Carnegie Foundation. And so there have been some 6- and 7-figure gifts that have come in. And our Chief Development Officer will start on the team, I believe, next month. So we'll have a person focused on chasing outside resources and developing corporate and philanthropic dollars going forward. But we've already seen some significant gifts come in as people are interested in some element of workforce, civic literacy, or other climate-related pieces. Was that responsive?
Yes, follow up. Is that part of the JCR or no? Do you know if that was included?
I don't believe it was.
Okay, and that's not, documentation of those outside resources are not written up anywhere, are they?
They were not in the JCR, but we can provide that, and we will provide that.
That would be helpful for us, I think. Thank you.
And just the last piece on that is because we take our responsibility seriously of the state certainly helped to launch this, but we're clear that the assignment is that this will not reach its full potential on state funds alone. We have to shift the cost to employers, and that's where you see the 33% target for this cycle, and we'll hit the 50% target in the following cycle.
And just as a follow-up too, that was always envisioned, as I recall, as a gradual transition, not, you're going to take it all today and leave it all to the employers tomorrow. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Yes, Senator.
Thank you very much. I have a close working relationship with the Umbrella Group in Sea Pleasant out of St. Margaret's Catholic Church. And they have, on page number 13, that's where I want to focus just a little bit. On page 13, the exhibit number 8. A lot of time is being spent. They have about 12 or 14, I don't know how many right now, but they have a number of youngsters who are participating in this program in which they're paid, given an hourly salary, and then at the end, they get a nice stipend. The people at the top do an impeccable job of training those youngsters. Right now, they are working in a school where the academic performance of the students is among the lowest in the county. And they are doing an incredible job. But it's the people at the top and the volunteers that they solicit to work with those youngsters. And some of them have gone on and gotten very wonderful jobs as a result of the work that's put forth by the people who train these youngsters. My concern, though, is that the pay for the people at the top. Could you all talk to me just a little bit about how they're compensated? Because I have to tell you, I don't know. One is a professor from the American University. I mean, they're top of the line. But they're saying to me, Senator Benson, look, we're doing this, but the pay. Talk to me a little bit about how they receive, how they paid. The people at the top. I'm about the people who train these participants.
Thank you for your question, Senator. So right now, all of our host site partners get a 5% administrative fee to help offset some of their costs. There is no additional staffing time written into the grant agreements that we have with them.
Could you repeat? You didn't hear.
Oh, sorry. So right now, our grant agreements includes a 5% administrative fee to help offset some of their costs, but one of the expectations of those host site partners as part of the cost sharing is that they do absorb some additional costs to supporting those members. We can certainly look into the structure and see if there's other ways to provide additional support.
Of course, I've been looking at the increases and the decrease, but the increase in this program is wise, because the youngsters who come into that program, I watched it, and they come in with one attitude, and with the expertise of the people at the top who have the skills to work with these youngsters. About right now, I mean, I was just at an activity last week. It was like night and day. The thing that I worry just a little bit about is how these people at the top are compensated.
Well, and I appreciate your time last week just talking about this very issue. So we'll keep looking at other ways we can support the partners that are doing good work in the community and supporting our members and doing what we can within the tight budget environment we find ourselves in. But thank you for the time. Thank
Senator
you.
Young?
I was trying to figure out what the investment costs were on a per program completed basis. Is that a legitimate measurement criteria? And if not, or if so, should it be based on total program costs or a subset of that? So for example, there are 230 completed individuals in the program. I was looking at total costs of the program, and on a per individual basis, that's a pretty big number. So I'm trying to understand if that's a legitimate measurement criteria, and if not, is there a better way to look at that?
So thanks for the question. I think there's a different way to look at it in the sense of, especially in the first class, it really did depend on where the member was placed. We engaged in some degree of means testing of the employer to see what costs they could bear. We did not want to come out the gate in any way signaling you don't have to have skin in the game. And so as we grow from year to year, and especially as we move into employers that will bear more of the cost, near 100%, it would really depend on where the member was serving to determine how much the employer was contributing versus how much DSCI was supporting. So there's just wide variation depending on whether they're in the nonprofit and what size of nonprofit, and then if they're in a private business and the size of the private business.
So I think what you're telling me is trying to average doesn't really paint an accurate picture.
Because we're now over or nearly 200 employers, so it would just depend. And I know that's not a straight answer, but we do value and want to always have a diversity of employers so members have choices. But yes, it would depend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Going once, going twice? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Next will be discussion of the State Reserve Fund.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. My name is Jacob Cash. I'll be presenting the budget analysis for the State Reserve Fund. As you can see on the cover page chart, the fiscal 2026 allowance decreases by $10 million to just over $250 million. This chart reflects proposed actions in the BRFA, which repeal requirements related to the unappropriated fiscal 2024 general fund surplus. The reduction contingent on the BRFA is $419 million to the rainy day fund, as well as $25 million each to the pension system and post-retirement health benefits trust. DLS is recommending directly making these reductions and deleting the language that makes those reductions contingent on legislation. You'll also note that there's $180 million in special funds included in the fiscal 2026 allowance. This represents an appropriation to the dedicated purpose account for funds transferred from the Strategic Energy Investment Fund. On page 2, I'd like to point out where $199 million in reserve funding was authorized last session to allow rainy day funds to be used to cover anticipated entitlement shortfalls in Medicaid and foster care. $90 million was transferred to Medicaid in fiscal 2024, and the budget assumes that $100 million will be transferred to Medicaid in 2025. None of the authorized funding is expected to be used for foster care payments. Exhibit 1 on page 4 shows the impact of the governor's proposed budget on the rainy day fund balance. The current plan transfers $219 million to the general fund, while the net impact of interest results in a reduction of $135 million between fiscal 2025 and 26. There is no planned appropriation to the fund this year. Exhibit 2 on page 5 shows the ending balance of $2.05 billion, which represents 8.1% of estimated general fund revenues. This is higher than the SAC recommendation of at least 7.5%, and due to lower general fund surpluses, consistent transfers from the fund, and no new appropriations this year, the fund balance has declined since fiscal 2023. Exhibit 3 on page 6 shows the fiscal 2026 appropriations to the dedicated purpose account that are in the governor's budget plan. Nearly all of these items are new. Most are related to economic initiatives announced by the governor. And drawing your attention to page 7, I'll begin talking about the $180 million in Strategic Energy Investment Fund spending. This funding is proposed to implement the state's climate pollution reduction plan and is in addition to $90 million budgeted last year. The plan includes to spend $80 million on solar and geothermal projects on public facilities, $50 million for solar development on state property, and $50 million for solar and geothermal projects for local school districts. DLS has concerns about the intended purposes for these specific funds, as they are restricted by statute for only certain purposes that impact underserved communities. DLS recommends adding budget bill language, making this appropriation contingent on legislation that expands the use of the intended funds. The Maryland Energy Administration has introduced HB 1273, which would expand the allowable uses. DLS asks CBM to comment on the intended use of those funds. Moving on to page 8 and 9, $8 million is added to the DPA for biomarker testing related to Chapter 322 of 2023. DLS recommends reducing these funds, delaying implementation of the bill. $5 million is added for the Division of Parole and Probation within the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services, and that funding is to be used for increasing staffing. And DLS estimates that approximately 50 positions could be added at current rates. $250,000 is being added for a PAYGO project to study a proposed public safety center in Hagerstown to replace their outdated and ineffective buildings. The remaining $57.5 million in the DPA in fiscal 2026 is for 12 new economic initiatives proposed by the governor. The Capital of Quantum initiative is the most costly at $17.5 million. The funding is meant to increase investments in a public-private partnership at UMD College Park for quantum science and technology. Of the $17.5 million, $3.5 is for the hiring of faculty members over time, and so DLS recommends reducing that amount by half, or $1.75, to reflect only immediate hiring needs. $7.5 million is added for the Downtown Frederick Hotel public-private partnership, which aims to develop a new hotel and conference center in Frederick. $7 million is being provided to create a certified sites program, which would attract businesses interested in developing sites across the state that offer significant economic development value. DLS recommends reducing those funds by half, or $3.5 million, due to the fiscal condition of the state. $5 million is added to expand the EARN program, and at the top of page 10, $2.2 million is added to the Child Care Capital Revolving Fund. $2 million is added for cyber workforce grants to support a pipeline of cybersecurity professionals in the state. And since this amount is in addition to $3 million added to Cyber Maryland in TEDCO, DLS recommends reducing the $2 million here in the DPA. $2 million is also added to support a design center at Johns Hopkins, and $2 million is added for permitting system upgrades, including $0.8 million in a customer relationship management system and IT tools for the Department of Commerce. DLS recommends reducing that $0.8 million for the Commerce IT systems. Finally, $1.3 million is added for cyber ranges at community colleges as part of the Workforce Accelerator Initiative, and $1 million is added to support strategic initiatives at the Department of Labor. Exhibit 4 on page 12 shows DPA fund balance transfers proposed by the BRFA. $203.4 million is transferred to the general fund, including $63.5 million in cybersecurity projects and $62.9 million in funding for the new state veterans home, which failed to acquire the necessary federal funding to move forward with the project. $2.5 million remains for that project due to lingering expense liabilities associated with project design, and $29.3 million remains for the state center relocation. 38.4 of what is cut and being transferred in the BRFA is being replaced by capital improvement program, or is being replaced in the capital improvement program with bond funds. Exhibit 5 on page 15 shows what funds remain in the DPA for past appropriations as of the start of fiscal 2025, accounting for planned balance transfers. It also lists the $250.75 million added in fiscal 2026. Most of the remaining funds are for long-term purposes or commitments, such as funds to expand autism waiver, support apprenticeship programs in the state, and allow the relocation of agencies from State Center. Other long-term projects include a variety of legislative priorities with small amounts remaining to complete their projects. Please turn to page 17 for the list of recommended actions. Items 1 through 2 show the direct reduction and removal of contingent language in the budget bill related to the $419 million mandated appropriation to the Rainy Day Fund. Items 6 and 13 show the direct reductions to the $25 million sweeper provisions. Items 7 through 12 show direct reductions to the 2026 DPA initiatives, and item 5 is technical. With that, my presentation is concluded, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Any questions?
I have one general question, and maybe it's more relevant for the department, but what is your understanding or impression of why a whole variety of initiatives have been put in the dedicated purpose account as opposed to just in the budget? Is there a rationale or a theory behind that that you're aware of?
While DB might be able to add more context to that, I believe a lot of that has to do with timing, when decisions are made, and they can also be placed in the DPA because it is a longer term project where, if the money is returned in 2026, they would have to reappropriate in other places, whereas in the DPA, it gets to stay there for that purpose. Why the economic initiatives particularly are being placed here, again, I can't say on the executive side, but from what we see, this puts it on one place so we consider the overall impact of them. Makes it a little bit easier to look at than spread throughout.
Okay, no, that's helpful. Any other questions? Going once? Yes, Senator.
Thank you. Yes. How's the money allocated for community colleges?
Is there community college funding in here? I think DBM might be able to speak more on that.
I'm sorry?
I think Department of Budget Management might be able to speak more on that. I'm not too aware of how much community college funding is involved in this.
Can you get back and let me know?
Yeah, we can absolutely look into that for you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Can folks from the department join us? That was the entry music. Well, welcome.
Good afternoon, Mr. Vice Chair and members of the committee. My name is Helene Grady. I'm Secretary of Budget and Management, and I'm here today with Mark Nicole, our Deputy Secretary, and we are also joined by Brad Fallon from the Governor's Office, in particular to help answer any questions folks have on the specific investments under the economic growth agenda, of which Brad was instrumental and very knowledgeable on those individual projects. We also have in the audience with us Megan Conklin, Chief Sustainability Officer for the administration, in case there are questions about the climate action investment that's in the DPA. So we appreciate Jacob's thorough analysis. The committee has my written testimony, which has more detail, but before we go to questions, I'll just highlight some key points here, if that's okay. In particular, just want to touch base quickly on the particular importance of sufficient reserve funds, and the analysis covers the status of the Rainy Day Fund. And this is particularly important in our view, given the extreme uncertainty ahead of us with changes at the federal level. As noted in the analysis, in light of our current economic uncertainty, the Moore administration has budgeted to maintain the Rainy Day Fund at just over $2 billion in fiscal 2026. That's 8% of general fund revenue. Secondly, I want to touch a little bit on the importance within the administration's framework for the proposed budget for fiscal 26, the importance that the economic growth initiatives and agenda really plays within that framework. And much of that analysis is covered in the hearing today as well because of those investments being budgeted within the dedicated purpose account. So as part of our overall budget framework and vision, the administration continues to focus on investments and policy decisions that will drive strong economic results for Maryland. The administration is squarely focused on investments to increase population and jobs and bring labor force participation back to pre-pandemic levels. These are critical factors to help us compete better for GDP growth, drive economic mobility for Marylanders, and enhance state revenues. Strengthening our state's economy in an equitable way underpins the progress we will make across all of our key policy priorities, including making Maryland's education system the best in the nation, making Maryland more affordable, and making Maryland safer. The proposed 26 budget includes significant investments to advance our progress in creating pathways to work, wages, and wealth for Marylanders, including $128 million in new targeted investments, most of which are budgeted within the dedicated purpose account, within state reserves, and are discussed in the DLS analysis for today's hearing. The $128 million in investment is estimated to drive $515 million in economic activity and support, create, or retain 2,600 jobs. The governor's proposed budget also includes new revenue specifically to support these targeted investments in the form of a 4-year 1% temporary surcharge on income from capital gains. With that, I can touch briefly on our response or reaction to each of DLS's recommendations. I won't go into as much detail as in the written testimony, but we're happy to take your questions as well afterwards. On page 3, DLS recommends deleting the $419 million rainy day fund appropriation, reducing the DPA appropriation by $50 million, and deleting language making these reductions contingent on legislation, and DBM concurs. On page 7, DLS recommends adopting budget bill language making the appropriation of $100 million special funds contingent on legislation authorizing the use of C funds for the disclosed purposes. The department respectfully disagrees with this recommendation, as MEA, the Energy Administration, and DBM believe the proposed projects for the $180 million appropriation are allowable uses. We've gone back after seeing DLS's recommendation and confirmed that with the agencies. On page 8, DLS asked that DBM comment on the intended use of the funds included in a provision in SB 434, HB 505, authorizing the use of the DPA to establish regulations and evaluation criteria for nuclear energy procurement. DBM understands that the MEA, the Maryland Energy Administration, does not believe this provision in the bill is needed and intends to amend this out of the bill. On page 8, DLS recommends reducing $8 million in general funds from the dedicated purpose account for biomarker testing. DBM respectfully disagrees with this recommendation. Chapter 322, 323 of 2023 requires the Maryland Medicaid program to provide broad coverage for biomarker testing beginning July 1st, 2025. This was a priority for the Legislative Black Caucus in 2023 that passed both chambers with near unanimous votes. The state's current fiscal challenges have prevented us from being able to fully implement the vision for this initiative in fiscal 2026, like so many other policy ambitions we have. This was projected to cost $24 million in state funds in fiscal 26, increasing to $45 million by fiscal 2030. However, the $8 million that is proposed in the budget within the dedicated purpose account focuses additional testing to have the greatest impact on eliminating health disparities. On page 9, DLS recommends reducing $1.75 million in general funds from the DPA for the Capital of Quantum initiative. DBM respectfully disagrees with this recommendation. We understand from College Park that a reduction to the faculty hires proposed in the analysis would have significant negative consequences for the Capital of Quantum initiative. On page 9, DLS recommends reducing $2.5 million in general funds for the Strategic Infrastructure Revolving Fund. Again, DBM respectfully disagrees with this recommendation. There is significant demand and interest from developers to utilize this fund for eligible projects. Reducing the appropriation by $2.5 million will reduce opportunities and impact of the state to support transformative projects that are primed for development with assistance from the state through this program. On page 9, DLS recommends reducing $3.5 million in general funds from the DPA for the Certified Sites Program. Similarly, the department respectfully disagrees with this recommendation. The Certified Sites Program is a program that is long overdue in Maryland, in our view. Other states, including Virginia and Pennsylvania, have had certified sites programs for many years and have been effective in attracting private sector investments to shovel-ready sites. On page 10, DLS recommends reducing $2 million in general funds from the DPA for cyber workforce grants. Again, the agency respectfully disagrees with the recommendation. Reducing $2 million for cyber workforce grants would undermine Maryland's ability to cultivate the skilled workforce necessary to sustain and expand our position as a national cybersecurity leader. And then last on page 10, DLS recommends reducing $800,000 in general funds from the $2 million appropriation to the DPA for economic agenda IT investments. DBM respectfully disagrees with this last recommendation. The Department of Commerce lacks basic technological tools that it needs today to be effective. This deficiency in modernization, I would note, was also cited and recommended by the Maryland Economic Council in their report submitted to the governor last year. With that, we're happy to answer any questions or go deeper into any of the topics in the analysis that would be helpful.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Any questions? Yes.
The question that I asked the analyst, why are things in the dedicated purpose account, this list of things, as opposed to in the budget themselves?
Well, I think Jacob did a pretty good job of answering, and we will probably second much of what he said. To be honest, I do think that part of it relates to transparency around the economic growth agenda in particular, and being able to see how the $128 million is packaged. But to be honest, a lot of it also has to do with timing in the budget process. And DBM's process, as we head into late November, beginning of January, as we're finalizing the governor's allowance, is such that we have to technically close out agency budgets as in order to hit our deadlines for producing the budget. And so sometimes late decisions are budgeted in the dedicated purpose account because that's still available to us even after agency budgets have technically closed.
Okay, no, that makes, go ahead if you want to add something.
No.
He's good.
Are there any of these, though, that are particularly expected to be multi-year and not all spent in 1 year?
So as Jacob mentioned, that is another reason that we often have for budgeting items in the dedicated purpose account, as does the General Assembly, so that the funds will carry over from year to year. Trying to think through our current, the 26 budget and what's in the DPA to think through. I think for the economic growth agenda, they're primarily meant to be spent during fiscal 26. In terms of other items budgeted in the DPA, the climate agenda, I could imagine, might carry over 2 years, Megan is saying, so that would be a reason for us to budget those funds in the DPA. It can really vary item by item.
Okay, thank you. I got one other question. The Labor Office of Strategic Initiatives, $1 million. For what? Nothing that I've seen says what it's for.
Sure, I'm going to ask Brad to actually take that question.
Yeah, and we have a 5 p.m. set up with you actually to discuss parts of this as well. So I'll bring you more information.
Okay.
And that's essentially what the General Assembly passed last year with kind of the Talent Innovation Fund, a more flexible tool to be able to meet employers where they're at, whether it is standing up a new apprenticeship or a different pathway to workforce training or upskilling. It just doesn't come with the same rigidity that EARN does, for instance.
Okay.
So, but Secretary Wu will bring some more
That's fine.
information later.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Howland?
Chairman, could I ask what the Strategic Infrastructure Revolving Fund, do you have projects that are already lined up for this funding?
I'm going to ask Brad to answer that question as well.
We do, and I wrote them down because I thought they might get asked. We do. We've had developers reach out to ask Medco over the last year. The bill passed last year and didn't have any funding in it, so folks got excited and all reached out and then have been left in stasis. Right now, the folks that have reached out is about Cheverly and Hospital Hill Development in Prince George's County, the Columbia Gateway Innovation District in Howard, the Curtis Bay Depot redevelopment in Anne Arundel County, the Southwest Technology Center, which is going to be the conversion of a former Social Security Administration building into a data center complex in Baltimore County, and SpaceX Security West Business Park in Woodlawn, which has also been eyed for a data center. And so I think a component of this works in tandem with the Certified Sites program. So there is a broader conversation that folks have asked. What tools are at disposal. So those are the ones that they have explicitly laid in on, though broader interest has been conveyed to Medco.
I'd like to follow up with you on some of that. Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Nice to see you, Chair.
All right, we are going to take a, what's that? Oh, donut there. Yeah. If you'd like a donut, I'm sure that that's available in the back. But we're going to take a 5-minute break before Capitol. 5 minutes. There's two